What would you do if you took out the trash after a grueling diner shift, only to find a bleeding man clutching two silent infants in the freezing rain? She thought she was saving a desperate father. She had no idea she just invited New York's deadliest kingpin inside. The neon sign of St. Jude's Diner flickered a harsh, unforgiving red against the relentless New York City downpour. It was 2:45 a.m. on a brutal Tuesday in November, and Zoe Matthews was utterly exhausted. Her feet ached inside her worn-out Converse sneakers, and her apron smelled of stale coffee, frying oil, and bleach. She was 24, drowning in student loan debt from a nursing program at NYU she had to abandon 2 years ago when her mother fell ill. Now she was surviving on double shifts and meager tips, living week to week in a cramped, drafty apartment in Astoria, Queens. "I'm locking up, Zoe," shouted Hank, the diner's grumbling owner, from the kitchen. "Take the garbage out back before you clock out." Zoe sighed, tying the heavy black trash bags together. She pushed through the heavy metal back door, bracing herself against the biting wind and the freezing rain. The alleyway behind 10th Avenue was pitch black, stinking of wet cardboard and city grime. She hoisted the bags into the rusted dumpster, the loud crash echoing off the brick walls. As she turned to leave, a low, guttural groan stopped her in her tracks. Zoe froze. The alleys of Hell's Kitchen were notorious, and her instincts screamed at her to run back inside. But then she heard a second sound, a soft, high-pitched whimper that didn't belong to a grown man. It sounded like a kitten. No, it sounded like a baby. Cautiously, Zoe pulled out her phone, clicking on the flashlight. The harsh white beam cut through the rain and landed on a horrifying scene. Slumped against the brick wall, half hidden behind a stack of wooden pallets, was a man. He was large, broad-shouldered, and dressed in what looked like a custom-tailored charcoal Brioni suit, a suit that was currently ruined, soaked with rain, and a massive, spreading stain of dark, thick blood blooming across his abdomen. But it wasn't the blood that made Zoe gasp. It was what he was holding. Tucked desperately against his chest, shielded by his heavy wool overcoat, were two identical infant carriers. Inside were two babies, barely a few months old, bundled tightly in cashmere blankets. Zoe dropped her phone in shock, scrambling to pick it up. "Oh my God," she breathed, rushing forward. Sir, hold on. I'm calling 911. Before her thumb could hit the dial button, a freezing, calloused hand shot out and gripped her wrist with terrifying strength. Zoe yelped, her eyes darting down to see a matte black Glock 19 pressed weakly but deliberately against her knee. "No cops," the man rasped. His voice was a gravelly whisper, thick with pain and a terrifying authority. His eyes, a piercing, stormy grey, locked onto hers. "You call the police. They die. My kids die. You're bleeding to death." Zoe panicked, her former nursing instincts fighting against her pure terror. "I have to get you to Bellevue, or—" "No hospitals," he interrupted, coughing, a fleck of blood appearing on his pale lips. "Hide us, please." His grip on her wrist faltered. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering against the wet pavement, and his eyes rolled back as he slumped completely unconscious against the bricks. One of the babies let out a sharp, distressed cry. Zoe stood paralyzed in the freezing rain. She should run. She should scream for Hank. But looking at the two helpless infants and the man who had used his last ounce of conscious strength to shield them from the storm. She knew she couldn't leave them to die in an alley. Working entirely on adrenaline, Zoe dragged the heavy man toward her beat-up 2009 Honda Civic parked at the edge of the alley. It was an agonizing, clumsy process. He was pure dead weight, solid muscle. She managed to heave him into the back seat, laying him flat, before carefully securing the two baby carriers in the back as well. She grabbed his gun, shuddering at the cold steel, and shoved it into her purse. The drive to Queens was a blur of frantic prayers and dodging streetlights. When she finally wrestled him up the 2 flights of stairs to her apartment, she was covered in his blood. She laid him on her small, worn-out couch, turning the heating up as high as it would go. Her tiny living room became a makeshift trauma ward. Zoe stripped off his ruined jacket and shredded his silk shirt to expose the wound. It was a clean through-and-through gunshot wound to the right flank. He was lucky. It seemed to have missed the major organs, but he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. She boiled water, sterilized her sewing needles, and used her old nursing kit to pack the wound with sterile gauze, stitching the jagged edges of the exit wound as best as she could. Through it all, the man didn't wake. He just muttered feverishly, his brow slick with sweat. Once he was stabilized and bandaged, Zoe turned her attention to the twins. They were a boy and a girl, beautiful and eerily calm, wrapped in blankets that probably cost more than her car. She used a clean washcloth to dry their faces, warming up some milk she had in the fridge, diluting it slightly because she didn't have baby formula. As she fed them, she couldn't help but look at the man on the couch. His face was striking, sharp jawline, dark hair, features that belonged on the cover of a GQ magazine rather than bleeding out in an alley. Who was he? Why did someone want him and his children dead? Exhausted, Zoe locked her deadbolt, pulled a chair up next to the couch, and kept a vigil through the night, terrified of what the morning would bring. The morning sun crept through the cheap plastic blinds of Zoe's apartment, casting long shadows across the living room. Zoe jerked awake in her chair, her neck stiff. Immediately, her eyes darted to the couch. It was empty. Panic seized her throat. She leapt up, but before she could call out, she heard a low hum coming from her tiny kitchen. She crept forward, peeking around the doorway. The stranger was awake. He was shirtless, his heavily tattooed back facing her, the stark white bandages tightly wound around his waist. He was standing by the counter, holding the baby girl with a surprising, practiced gentleness, rocking her while he heated a bottle of milk in a pot of water. "She prefers it lukewarm," he said, not turning around. His voice was deeper now, devoid of the desperate rasp from the night before, replaced by a smooth, terrifyingly calm baritone. Zoe jumped. "How did you know I was there?" He slowly turned, assessing her with those sharp grey eyes. In the daylight, he was even more intimidating. Scars crisscrossed his chest, blending into elaborate dark tattoos. "You breathe loud when you're scared," he said simply. He walked past her, sitting heavily on the edge of the armchair, wincing slightly as he cradled his daughter. The baby boy was fast asleep in the carrier on the floor. "You lost a lot of blood," Zoe managed to say, finding her voice. "You shouldn't be walking, and I need to know who you are. I pulled a bullet out of you." "A graze," he corrected, though the sweat on his forehead betrayed his pain. "You have steady hands. You a doctor?" Nursing dropout. She crossed her arms, trying to look braver than she felt. Now answer the question. Who are you? Why were you shot? He was silent for a long moment, studying her apartment. He took in the peeling wallpaper, the stack of past due bills on the table, the thrift store furniture. Finally, he looked at her. "My name is Vincent," he said. "The twins are Leo and Mia. My wife passed away when they were born. Last night, I was ambushed. Business rivals. What kind of business involves shootouts and babies in alleys?" Zoe demanded. Before Vincent could answer, a violent pounding on the front door shattered the quiet. Zoe flinched. "Zoe, open the damn door," a slurred, aggressive voice yelled from the hallway. It was Tyler, her toxic, deadbeat ex-boyfriend. He had a nasty habit of showing up when he was desperate for cash to pay off his sports betting debts. "Don't answer it," Vincent said softly, his demeanor shifting instantly. The gentle father vanished. His eyes went dead and cold. "I have to, or he'll break the door off the hinges and the landlord will evict me," Zoe whispered frantically. She hurried to the door, undoing the chain and opening it a crack. Tyler shoved the door hard, forcing his way inside. He smelled of stale beer and cheap cigarettes. "You didn't answer my texts," Tyler snarled, backing Zoe against the wall. "I need $300, Chloe. Now. Tony's guys are looking for me." "I don't have it, Tyler. I barely have rent," Zoe pleaded, pushing against his chest. "Don't lie to me. You got tipped out last night." Tyler raised his hand, grabbing her hard by the shoulder. "Take your hand off her." The voice was so quiet, so devoid of emotion, that it made the hairs on Zoe's arms stand up. Tyler froze, turning his head. Vincent was leaning against the kitchen archway. He was still shirtless, the bloody bandages wrapped around his ribs, but in his right hand, resting casually against his thigh, was the Glock 19. Tyler's face drained of color. He let go of Zoe, taking a stumbling step back. "Who the hell are you?" Vincent didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. He just stared at Tyler with the eyes of a predator looking at a very small, very annoying insect. "I am going to give you 3 seconds to walk out that door. If I ever see your face in this neighborhood again, if you ever breathe in this woman's direction again, they won't find enough of you to bury." 1. Tyler didn't wait for 2. He scrambled backward, tripped over the threshold, and practically fell down the stairs, the door slamming shut behind him. Zoe stood shaking, staring at Vincent. He casually engaged the safety on the gun and set it on the counter, turning his attention back to the crying baby. "You didn't have to do that," Zoe whispered, her heart hammering. "He's just an idiot." "Idiots get people killed," Vincent replied coldly. "You saved my life. Consider your pest problem handled." Zoe needed air. She needed out of this apartment. "I'm going to the pharmacy," she announced, grabbing her coat. "You need broad-spectrum antibiotics, or that wound is going to go septic. Don't open the door for anyone." She rushed out, her mind spinning. Who was this man? He handled a gun like an extension of his own arm, and he terrified a grown man without raising his voice. It took her an hour to track down her old nursing school friend, Dave, who worked at a sketchy independent pharmacy in Queens and owed her a favor. She traded $100 from her tip jar for a bottle of strong antibiotics and some proper infant formula. When she unlocked her apartment door, it was unnervingly quiet. She walked softly down the short hallway. The twins were asleep in the bedroom. Vincent was standing by the window in the living room, his back to her, speaking into a cheap burner phone he must have stashed in his suit pants. Zoe stopped, clutching the pharmacy bag to her chest, listening as his cold, authoritative voice drifted across the room. "I don't care if they have the cops on payroll," Vincent was saying, his tone dripping with venom. "They crossed the line. They went after my children. I want the entire Castellano family hunted down. Burn their warehouses in Brooklyn, sink their shipments at the docks, and find out who leaked my location." He paused, listening. "I don't care who gets in the way. I want the streets running red by midnight." Zoe's breath hitched in her throat. The paper bag in her hands crinkled loudly. Vincent snapped the burner phone shut and turned around. The silence in the room was deafening. Zoe dropped the bag. The plastic bottle of antibiotics hit the floor with a thud. She wasn't harboring a desperate businessman. She had read about the Castellano family in the New York Post. They were a brutal mafia syndicate, which meant the man standing in her living room, the man she had patched up with sewing thread, was their rival. He was Vincent Gallo, the head of the Gallo crime syndicate. "You're a mob boss," Zoe whispered, backing slowly toward the door. You're a murderer." Vincent didn't move toward her, but his eyes locked onto hers, trapping her in place. "I am a father protecting his children, and you, Zoe, are currently the only person in New York City who knows I'm still alive." "I won't say anything," she stammered, her hand reaching behind her back for the doorknob. "I swear, I'll just leave. You can have the apartment." "You can't leave," Vincent said, taking a slow, agonizing step toward her. His voice wasn't a threat. It was a dark, inescapable promise. "The people looking for me are thorough. If they check the alley cameras and see your car, they will find you. They will torture you to get to me, and then they will kill you." He stopped just inches from her. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You saved my life, Zoe, which means you're part of this now," Vincent murmured, reaching out to gently take her trembling hand away from the doorknob. "Under my roof, you stay alive. Walk out that door, and you're dead." Suffocating tension filled the tiny Queen's apartment for 3 agonizing days. Rain continuously hammered against the frosted glass of the small bathroom window, mirroring the relentless anxiety gnawing at Zoe's stomach. 72 hours had passed since Vincent Gallo claimed her living room as his personal fortress. It was a surreal existence, characterized by whispered phone calls in rapid-fire Italian, and the jarring sight of a ruthless syndicate boss carefully burping a newborn over his heavily tattooed shoulder. Vincent occupied her thrift store armchair like a king on a threadbare throne. Thanks to the heavy antibiotics from Dave's pharmacy, his fever had broken, and the gunshot wound was healing cleanly. He moved with stiff, measured grace, his storm-grey eyes constantly tracking the street below through the gap in the plastic blinds. Sleep became a luxury Zoe could no longer afford. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren echoing down Ditmars Boulevard, sent her heart hammering against her ribs. She busied herself sterilizing bottles of Similac, avoiding his intense gaze. "You are vibrating with stress," Vincent murmured on the 4th evening. He sat at her cramped kitchen table, expertly disassembling and cleaning his Glock 19 with a ragged dish towel. "Pardon me for not being used to harboring a fugitive kingpin," Zoe snapped back, instantly regretting her tone. She braced for anger, but Vincent merely paused his rhythmic wiping of the barrel. "Fear keeps you sharp. Panic gets you killed," he stated calmly, snapping the slide back into place with a chilling, metallic clack. "They are tearing the city apart looking for me, but as long as we stay put, we hold the advantage." Heavy, unsynchronized footsteps suddenly echoed in the hallway outside. Complete silence descended over the apartment. These were not the shuffling steps of Mrs. Higgins from 4B. These were deliberate, heavy treads. 3 sets of boots. Vincent's demeanor transformed instantly from composed father to lethal apex predator. He scooped up Leo and Mia, gently but swiftly depositing them into their carriers. Grabbing his weapon, he pressed his back against the wall beside the front door, gesturing sharply for Zoe to get down. Splinters of cheap wood exploded inward as the front door gave way under a massive kick. Deafening, suppressed gunfire instantly chewed through the drywall, showering Zoe in white dust. 2 men dressed in dark tactical gear swarmed into the narrow entryway. They didn't stand a chance. Vincent moved with terrifying, calculated precision. 2 muted retorts from his weapon dropped both intruders before they could even sweep the room. "Fire escape, now!" Vincent roared over the ringing in her ears, grabbing the twin carriers in one massive arm. Adrenaline overrode Zoe's paralyzing terror. She scrambled off the floor, throwing open the living room window and shoving the rusted iron grate aside. Freezing precipitation washed over her as she climbed out onto the precarious metal landing. Vincent followed immediately, his broad frame shielding the infants from the downpour. "Keep moving down," he commanded, his eyes scanning the pitch-black alley below. Metal groaned under their combined weight as they descended. When they reached the bottom drop-down ladder, a 3rd gunman rounded the corner of the brick building, raising an automatic rifle. Zoe didn't think. She reacted, grabbing a heavy, waterlogged ceramic plant pot resting on the fire escape railing. She hurled it with all her strength. The heavy clay smashed directly onto the gunman's shoulder, throwing off his aim just as he squeezed the trigger. Bullets sparked against the brick wall inches from Vincent's head. Vincent returned fire instantly, neutralizing the threat. "My car is at the end of the block," Zoe gasped, her chest heaving as she dropped to the wet pavement. "No good. They have your plates," Vincent growled, leading her in the opposite direction toward the chaotic noise of the N/W subway line. "We disappear into the tunnels." Sprinting through the labyrinthine alleys of Astoria in the dead of night, hauling 2 infants while dodging a cartel hit squad was a nightmare Zoe could never have imagined. Yet she kept pace with the towering mob boss. She realized, with a shock of clarity, that he wasn't just dragging her along. He was actively positioning his body between her and any open sightlines. He was protecting her. Down in the subway station, the fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively. Vincent shoved her into a dingy service alcove, pulling out his burner phone. He dialed a number, speaking exactly 3 words. "Bring the cavalry." Within 15 minutes, the screeching halt of 3 heavily armored black Escalades outside the station signaled their salvation. Men in tailored suits and earpieces swarmed the platform, their faces grim and professional. "Boss," a broad-shouldered enforcer said, bowing his head respectfully as he took the baby carriers from Vincent. "We secured the perimeter. We know how they found you." "Tell me," Vincent demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal octave. "A local junkie, name of Tyler, sold your description and the girl's address to the Castellano capos for $5,000 to clear a betting debt." Bile rose in Zoe's throat. Tyler, her deadbeat ex, had essentially signed her death warrant for a handful of cash. She swayed on her feet, the exhaustion and betrayal finally catching up to her. Before she could collapse onto the filthy concrete, strong arms caught her. "I've got you," Vincent whispered, pulling her flush against his solid chest. The scent of rain, gunpowder, and expensive cologne wrapped around her. "It's over. You're safe now." Gilded chandeliers cast a warm golden hue over the sprawling Tribeca penthouse, a stark contrast to the blood-soaked alleyways of Queens. Wall-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering Manhattan skyline, completely insulating the occupants from the sirens wailing far below. 48 hours had passed since their harrowing subway escape. In that time, Zoe had witnessed the breathtaking, terrifying machinery of the Gallows Syndicate roar to life. The penthouse was impenetrable, guarded by dozens of heavily armed, intensely loyal men. The twins were currently asleep in a nursery that looked like it belonged in a royal palace, watched over by a vetted, private night nurse. Karma, Zoe quickly learned, was Vincent Gallo's specialty. Sitting curled on a massive velvet sofa, clutching a mug of imported tea, she watched the news broadcast on a massive flat screen. Headlines blared about a night of unprecedented underworld violence. 3 Castellano warehouses had mysteriously burned to the ground. Their illicit shipping containers at the Red Hook docks had sunk to the bottom of the harbor. The rival family had been crippled in a span of 2 days. As for Tyler, Zoe had overheard one of the enforcers reporting to Vincent. Her ex-boyfriend hadn't even gotten to spend his blood money. The bookie he owed, realizing Tyler had crossed the most dangerous man in New York, immediately handed him over to Vincent's crew. Tyler was currently residing in a very deep, very permanent hole in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. She felt absolutely no pity. Heavy oak doors swung open, and Vincent strode into the living area. He wore a crisp, tailored black suit, his tie loosened, looking every inch the untouched sovereign of the city. The bandages were hidden, and his movements were fluid again. "The Castellano threat is neutralized," Vincent announced, walking over to the private bar to pour 2 fingers of amber scotch. "Their leadership is gone. The streets belong to us again." "And the mole?" Zoe asked softly. She had learned enough over the last few days to know that an ambush like the one in the alley required inside information. Vincent's grip on the crystal tumbler tightened. "Dealt with," he said coldly. "My former underboss, Vincent. He thought I went soft after my wife died. He thought carrying my children made me a weak target. He learned his final lesson an hour ago. Brutal, swift justice. It was a terrifying world, operating on a ruthless code of honor and violence." Setting his glass down, Vincent crossed the expansive room and stopped in front of her. He looked down at her, his stormy eyes softer than she had ever seen them. The lethal mob boss melted away, leaving only the man she had patched up with sewing thread and cheap antibiotics. "You saved my life, Zoe," Vincent said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble in the quiet room. You protected my children when you owed us nothing. You threw yourself into the line of fire. I did what anyone would do, she argued weakly, looking down at her hands. No, he corrected firmly, sitting beside her on the sofa. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently tilting her chin up, so she was forced to look at him. Most people would have run. Most people would have called the cops and let me bleed out. You didn't. You have more fire and loyalty in your blood than half the men in my syndicate. Heat rushed to her cheeks at the intense proximity. My apartment is ruined. My life in Astoria is gone. I know, Vincent murmured, his thumb lightly brushing across her jawline, sending a shiver down her spine. I can give you a new identity, a house anywhere in the world, enough money so you never have to smell stale diner coffee or struggle to pay a bill again. You can walk away, completely free. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Is that what you want? Zoe asked, her voice barely above. Do you want me to walk away? Vincent's gaze darkened, sweeping over her features with an possessive intensity that made her breath hitch. If I was a good man, I would put you on a plane to Paris tonight. I would keep you far away from my world. He leaned in closer, his lips hovering inches from hers. But I am a selfish man, Zoe, and the thought of you walking out that door is the only thing that terrifies me more than a loaded gun. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. The danger surrounding him was undeniable, but so was the fierce, unwavering protection he offered. She had survived the storm, and she realized she had no desire to return to a quiet, empty life. I always hated Paris anyway, Zoe whispered. Vincent's lips curved into a rare, devastating smile just before he closed the distance, kissing her with a desperate, claiming heat. The kingpin had found his queen, and the empire was exactly where she belonged. What an unbelievable collision of two totally different worlds. Zoe's bravery in the face of absolute terror changed her destiny forever, proving that sometimes the most dangerous choices lead to your true path. Did Vincent's brutal karma satisfy you? Let me know your thoughts down below. If you loved this intense mafia romance, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories.